I found myself in a questionable situation on Halloween a few years back when my cousin visited just for trick-or-treating.
I was 15 then.
Which might seem a bit old for this tradition. But who can resist free candy? My cousin, also 15, and I planned to take it easy that Halloween, hitting enough houses to collect a decent stash before heading home. My friend and his younger brother joined us, but we eventually split up. It was quite crowded, with tons of kids at every house adorned with decorations. My cousin Jack and I decided to focus on houses with their lights on, but no kids already at the front doors. Most of the houses we visited before had no decorations, but were welcoming trick-or-treaters, while the other kids seemed to target the more elaborately decorated homes. We zipped through about 4 houses in no time since there were no lines. The next house we approached was unadorned, yet it had a light on, so we thought we'd give it a try. We knocked, and an older man answered the door fully, revealing 5 younger guys standing behind him. The younger men appeared to be in their late 30s, while the older man looked to be in his early 50s. He offered us a bowl of candy, reached in, and dropped some into our bags. He asked Jack for his name, to which Jack replied with a fake one, then said goodbye before the older man could speak further. Once we stepped off the porch, alarms began ringing in my mind, and I noticed Jack looked just as unsettled. We exchanged thoughts about how strange it was. Why were there 6 guys right there when we knocked? Why did they all seem so odd? Those questions swirled in my head, and both of us felt a bit shaken by the experience. After visiting 2 more houses, we started making our way back to my place when we glanced back to see a car pulling out of the driveway. The car drove in our direction and slowed down right next to us. The streets were clear, with all the trick-or-treaters on the sidewalks, so there was no reason for the car to slow down beside us. We quickened our pace, only for another car to speed up behind it, matching the first car's speed. I recognized the driver of the first car. It was the older guy who had given us candy, and the second car's driver was one of the 5 suspicious guys. There was also someone in the front passenger seat, but I could only see their silhouette. When Jack and I were just 2 houses away from mine, the first car parked directly across the street. We didn't see where the second car went, so we dashed back inside. Our parents, who were in the living room chatting, asked what was wrong. We recounted the whole story, and when we checked the window to see if the car was still there, it was. Just 5 seconds later, it drove off, probably having been parked there for the 5 minutes since we entered the house. My mom and Jack's mom wanted us to show our dads the house where all those guys were, but our parents eventually calmed us down, suggesting it was just a Halloween prank or something. However, I have my own theory about what was happening. The presence of 6 guys at the doorway suggested they were waiting for younger trick-or-treaters to jump or grab them. But when they saw Jack and I were teenagers and roughly the same height, they opted to play it cool, despite their sketchy demeanor. The reason they followed us in their cars remains a mystery. But when the night came to a close and everyone turned in for the night, I realized that house was just 1 block away from mine. That was many years ago. My friend Anthony and I were getting into our costumes to go trick-or-treating. We went door to door like any typical night. Upon reaching the older section of our neighborhood, our parents had advised us against going there since we were only 12 and unfamiliar with the area. We approached the first house, where a nice lady opened the door and handed us giant Hershey bars. As we headed to the second house in this neighborhood, a random guy came sprinting down the street, screaming as he emerged from behind a church. Initially, we thought it was a Halloween prank and laughed. However, as he approached, he tried to snatch the pillowcase full of candy from my hands. My buddy Anthony quickly retaliated, hitting him with his pillowcase. By the time we reached this part of the neighborhood, we had amassed quite a bit of candy, and being struck by that pillowcase had to hurt. Anthony kept hitting him until the guy let go of the pillowcase and took off. We assumed that was the end of it until we began walking back. Still shocked and confused, I called my mom, asking her to pick us up since we were quite far from home, and that experience made us eager to get off the streets. When she arrived, we explained what happened, and she almost didn't believe us. It sounded too ridiculous. We got home around 10 p.m., and shortly after, there was a knock at the front door. My dad thought it was just a late-night trick-or-treater, so he went to answer. Standing there was a man in a jumpsuit with a Michael Myers mask. My dad was puzzled, wondering what he was doing out alone for Halloween, as he appeared to be an older man and not a kid or teen.
Regardless,
My dad simply gave him candy without questioning it further, while Anthony and I were sitting on the couch. We noticed him staring at us. His masked face seemed fixed on us in the living room. I felt a sense of unease and was waiting for him to leave. Eventually, my dad shut the door in his face when he wouldn't walk away. Fast forward to around 1 a.m. We were about to head to bed when we heard a knock at the door. There was no way I was going to open it at that hour. It couldn't be anything good this late. I went to tell my dad about the knock, and he advised me to just ignore it. Anthony and I went upstairs and turned on a movie. However, Anthony heard something and urged me to mute the TV.
once I did.
I heard it too, leaves crackling in the backyard. Peering out, I saw the man in the Michael Myers costume swinging on our swing set, gazing into my bedroom window. My heart raced as if it might leap out of my chest. It felt like he was purposely recreating a horror movie scene to frighten us. I dashed to my dad's room, informing him about the man on the swing set. He displayed an expression of shock and concern, mirroring our own, and looked outside, but the man was nowhere to be seen. Just then, we heard a knock at the back door. My dad went downstairs to check, but no one was there. This man was clearly toying with us, harassing us for fun. It had to be a Halloween prank. My dad was equally disturbed now. Suddenly, I heard my mom scream from the other room, prompting Anthony, my dad, and me to rush upstairs to find the man in the Michael Myers costume, standing at the foot of the bed, staring at my mom. My dad instructed Anthony and me to run and call the police. We bolted downstairs and grabbed the nearest phone, dialing 911 to report that a man dressed as Michael Myers had broken into our house. The operator asked if everyone was all right, and I said, "He's upstairs, and my dad has him, but we need police immediately." She told me to stay on the line, assuring me that officers were on their way. From upstairs, we heard my dad screaming, followed by the sound of the sliding window being opened. We rushed upstairs to find my mom and dad on the floor. My mom was crying, and my dad's nose was bleeding. He explained that the man had jumped out through the window when the police arrived. Anthony, my dad, and I recounted everything we could to the officers, who then conducted a thorough search of the property inside and out, taking about 20 minutes, but found nothing. I think that may have been my last year trick-or-treating for good reason. I still wonder if the man who tried to snatch my candy was the same one wearing the Michael Myers costume, and I regret not mentioning that detail to the police. Halloween has always been one of my least favorite days. I never had many friends in middle or high school, so I often lacked plans for Halloween. I didn't go trick-or-treating in middle school, and in high school, I skipped the parties. At that time, my sister was away at college, so my parents were rarely home. I often found myself alone on Halloween nights. That year, Halloween fell on a Friday, and kids were out in droves. Later than usual, my parents were gone for the week, leaving behind bags of candy for me to hand out. I grew tired of the doorbell ringing every few minutes, so I eventually poured an entire bag of candy into a bowl from one of the kitchen cabinets. My mom usually avoided leaving a bowl on the stoop, but she wasn't home. So what could she do? That strategy worked for a while, as the constant ringing stopped for a couple of hours at least. When the bowl was empty, I refilled it, not expecting to hear the doorbell ring again that night. I figured people would realize not to ring the bell at a house with an empty bowl. However, when the doorbell rang again, I was taken aback and felt a bit annoyed. I ignored the first ring, but about 30 seconds later, another ring sounded. This time, I got up to answer the door, a bit irritated. As I opened it, I was greeted by a group of 3 teenagers dressed in various Halloween costumes. They seemed a little older than the usual trick-or-treaters, perhaps around 16 or 17. Their costumes were more elaborate than most, with one dressed as a vampire, another as a ghost, and the third as a witch. "Trick or treat," they shouted in unison, their voices echoing in the chilly night air. I glanced down at the empty bowl beside me, regretting not having refilled it sooner. "Sorry,
Guys,
I just ran out of candy," I said, trying to keep my tone light. Even though I felt guilty, the teenagers exchanged glances, and I could sense a change in their demeanor. "You must have a stash hidden somewhere," the vampire said, smirking. I shook my head, insisting, "I really don't." But their eyes narrowed, and I felt an uncomfortable tension growing in the air. "Come on, don't be stingy. Just a little bit," the witch urged. Stepping forward, I stood my ground, feeling a chill creep up my spine.
I really can't.
I repeated, my voice firmer now. Suddenly, the ghost stepped closer, blocking the doorway.
"How about you just give us what you have?"
he suggested. A sly grin spreading across his face. Panic surged through me. I didn't like the look in their eyes. They were no longer just trick-or-treaters. They were starting to feel like a threat. "I think you guys should leave," I said, trying to sound more assertive. Before I could slam the door shut, they pushed against it. The ghost shouted, Wait, we're just messing with you. We just want a little candy." Realizing they were no longer joking, my heart raced. I said no. I managed to shout as I pushed back against the door with all my strength. In that moment, they must have realized I wasn't going to back down. The vampire shrugged, signaling to the others, "Fine, whatever. Let's go find someone else." As they retreated down the steps, I slammed the door shut and locked it, my heart pounding in my chest. I leaned against the door,
taking deep breaths,
feeling both relieved and shaken. The doorbell rang again shortly after, and I flinched, my heart racing anew. I peeked through the peephole, but this time, no one was there. I waited for a few moments, my anxiety growing with each passing second, convinced the teenagers might return. Finally, I calmed down enough to grab my phone and text a friend, telling them what had happened. I decided to keep the lights dim and stayed away from the front window, not wanting to attract any more attention. The rest of the night passed uneventfully, and as I settled onto the couch, I promised myself I'd never take the risk of being alone on Halloween again. That was the last time I'd spend the night alone while kids were out roaming the streets. From that year on, Halloween has always been a reminder of that unsettling encounter, and I make sure to find friends to celebrate with instead. Sumakaista.